If you're watching this video, you've probably heard of these two Portuguese residency visas, the D7 visa and the Golden visa. Now, on paper, they are very similar. After all, they both lead to residency in Portugal, eventually permanent residency, and also citizenship. But here's the truth. They're for two very different types of people. Not personality-wise, but in terms of needs and goals. And today, I'll break down the real-world differences and help you figure out which visa makes sense for you. I will be including clips from lawyers and other experts so you can actually get accurate information on this and not just info from some guy on the internet. So let's look at some questions to help you figure out which of these two visas is right for you. And if you would like to talk through this with somebody, visit portugalist.com/chat. Do you want to move to Portugal full-time? And when I say full-time, I mean roughly around 8 months of the year. If you are happy for your house to be in Portugal, your tax residency to be in Portugal, even your local supermarket to be in Portugal, then the D7 is probably a better fit for you, because the D7 requires you to spend roughly 8 months of the year in Portugal.
So all the residency visas, the D7, the D8, require you to reside in Portugal, to have your home in Portugal. And according to the law, within a 2-year period, and this is only checked upon renewal. And within a 2-year period, you should not leave the country for more than 6 months in a row or 8 months total.
The Golden Visa, on the other hand, only requires you to spend a minimum average of 7 days per year in Portugal. Now, you can spend more than that. You can spend the full 365 days of the year in Portugal, but the minimum for the Golden Visa is an average of 7 days per year. Do you only have savings? So the D7 requires you to have passive income. That's something like a pension, US Social Security, rental income, royalties, dividends, etc. But not everybody has this, and some people have a lump sum, say sitting in the bank, or something that they can access. Now, if you have 500,000 euros, you can qualify for the Golden Visa. You'll need the 500,000 euros for your investment, and then you'll need some extra for government fees and legal fees, but you can qualify with a lump sum. You can't qualify for the D7 with a lump sum. You could potentially take that 500,000 euros and buy a rental property and qualify with the income from that, or put it into an annuity and qualify with that, or any other kind of investment that would generate some kind of passive income. But on its own, you typically won't qualify for the D7 visa. If you're ready to make a move full-time to Portugal somewhere within the next year or two, maybe even within the next 3, 4, or 5 years, then something like the D7 might be a better option. Now, notice that I did say might. Most people considering a move to Portugal, particularly if it's within the next year or two, are going to wait until they're ready to move and then move on a visa like the D7 or perhaps the digital nomad visa or any other full-time residency visa. Now, you don't have to do this. Instead of waiting, you could apply for the Golden Visa now, meet the minimum stay requirements, which are roughly 7 days per year on average, and then when you're ready to move full-time, say in 3, 4, or 5 years, you can do that then. The upside of waiting and applying for something like the D7 in the future is that it'll be much cheaper. However, the upside of going with the Golden Visa now is that your residency can begin straight away, which means you'll be eligible for Portuguese citizenship sooner. It also means that if anything happens to the D7, for example, if the Portuguese government makes the requirements much harder, or if they get rid of it completely, you'll already have your residency in Portugal.
So I believe that Portugal also has a pressure from European Union to reduce and not to be just with a country with open doors to the rest of the world, because these are open doors to Europe. So I believe that sooner or later, there will be the requirements for the D7 will be more demanding and more complex.
Are you just looking for a backup plan? So, over the past few years, a lot of people coming to Portugalist, particularly from the United States, but also other parts of the world where things are turbulent, those people are wanting a backup plan. They're not necessarily looking to move to Portugal, or even if they did, it wasn't something that they were thinking about 5 or maybe 10 years ago. Many don't want to leave where they live now. For example, the US, where they might have a good, well paying job, family, or maybe they just enjoy living there. But they do want a backup plan in case things go wrong. If that's you, the golden visa is almost certainly a better option. This is because you only need to spend an average of 7 days per year in Portugal to maintain your residency. That's a vacation. That's not a full-time move. You don't have to make your home in Portugal. You don't have to become tax resident here. You can maintain all of that somewhere else. Aside from the cost and the paperwork, and there is always paperwork in Portugal, regardless of which visa option you go for, you won't really be uprooting your life. Do you mainly want to spend more time in Portugal? So currently, if you are a non-EU, EEA, or Swiss citizen, for example, if you're British, if you're American, if you're Canadian, if you're Indian, you can spend 90 days in every 180 days in the Schengen area. So roughly 3 months consecutively every 6 months. What that means, though, is after 90 days, you'll have to wait another 90 days before you can re-enter. And it gets more complicated if those 90 days aren't in a row. And that's not just for the whole of Portugal, that's for the whole of the Schengen area, which is more or less the same as the EU. There are people that want to spend more than 90 days in Portugal, maybe 4 months, 5 months, maybe even 6 months, but not necessarily any more than that. And that's where the golden visa comes in, because you can spend as little as 7 days per year on average, but less than the number of days where you would become a tax resident. So this sweet spot allows you to spend anywhere from around 3 to 6 months in Portugal, again, without uprooting your life. Now, my next question is, do you want to avoid Portuguese tax residency? A lot of people from the US look at Portuguese taxes and nearly have a heart attack. Now, I will say taxes aren't everything. People in the US, for example, also have to factor in health insurance costs, whereas that's not necessarily a cost to consider living in Portugal. However, people in the US do need to factor this in, and there are a lot of other taxes there besides just income tax. That said, Portuguese taxes aren't low. Now, if you move to Portugal on a visa like the D7 or the digital nomad visa, the D2, the D1, the D3, any other visa, you will most likely become a Portuguese tax resident. That means you will be taxed on your worldwide income. Now, you can claim a tax credit, so to speak. So that means if you have already paid taxes in the US, for example, you probably won't pay them in Portugal as well, and you can claim one against the other. But basically, taxes are still a reality. Now, on the golden visa, you don't necessarily need to become a tax resident, assuming you don't make Portugal your permanent home. This means you could continue paying taxes in a lower tax country like the US or Singapore, for example, spend up to 6 months of the year here, just a little bit less than what would make you a tax resident in Portugal, and again avoid the bureaucracy and the higher costs that come with being a tax resident in Portugal. Now, the good news is Portuguese golden visa holders are entitled to use the public healthcare system once they are legally resident in Portugal, although many will have health insurance as well and use the Portuguese private hospitals, which, even though you are paying for insurance and maybe paying some out-of-pocket costs, are typically cheaper than other countries like the US. Are you doing this for your children? Now, some people on the D7 visa are doing this for their children, and some people on the golden visa are doing this for their children. So both visas could potentially be the right answer. On a visa like the D7 or the digital nomad visa, for example, people make a full time move to Portugal. And this is usually because it's safer or has a lower cost of living or has a less stressful lifestyle. Basically, somewhere better to raise children than other countries like, for example, Brazil or the US. Obviously, if you are on a D7 visa, if your family are on that visa, one of the main goals is that you'll be able to obtain Portuguese citizenship. You will be able to study at a Portuguese university, or your children will. And if they have Portuguese citizenship, they will then be able to study at universities in the EU or EEA. So, for example, they could go and study in France or Germany. Now, with the Golden Visa, people are also doing this for their children, however, in a slightly different way. They may not want to uproot their children's lives. For example, they may live in one of the countries that I mentioned, but they may have a very good quality of life there, aside from perhaps the safety or the cost of living. But they may be going to very good schools, they may have friends there, they may have a life that they don't want changed. So, with the Golden Visa, parents can put their children onto their Golden Visa application, bring them to Portugal for an average of 7 days per year, and have them obtain residency in Portugal and later Portuguese citizenship, allowing them to study at a Portuguese university or, once they have citizenship, a university in the EU. This means they get the best of both worlds. They get the opportunity to study in Europe at a much lower cost than many, many other countries without really uprooting their children's lives. And it may even make sense for the parents to do this. If you weigh up the costs of a child going to a US university, for example, versus the costs involved in the Golden Visa, especially if you have more than one kid, it could make financial sense to go down this route. Now, are you concerned that the rules might change? The world is in a state of flux, and Portugal and Europe is absolutely no exception. Now, 15 years ago, or thereabouts, Portugal was desperately trying to convince people to move to Portugal. It had a handful of retirees from the UK and Germany and Netherlands living in the Algarve, but that was more or less it. Now they're making it harder. They're trying to change citizenship laws. New visas, like the digital nomad visa, are roughly 4 times harder than the initial D7 visa. Tax benefits, like the old NHR regime, are now gone. And it's not just Portugal. Other EU countries have changed their rules and have abolished their golden visas. Most EU countries have a far right, or at least very right leaning party who have decided they've had enough of emigration. So, what does this mean for changes in Portugal? The answer is we don't know. But as many lawyers will point out, the requirements for something like the D7 visa are very, very easy. Maybe too easy. And it's possible that they will change soon. And by change, that could mean that the requirements will get harder, or it could mean that the visa will go altogether. So if you're concerned about this, you have two options. One, you could move to Portugal full time now on the D7 visa, or at least be ready to move if such an announcement is made. Typically, when Portugal makes an announcement about this, there's usually a little bit of leeway, but there's a full on panic. There's a lot of backlog. There's a lot of people trying to do the same thing. So you definitely want to have all your ducks in a row if you think you're going to go down that route. The other option is you get the golden visa now. You secure your residency, and even though it'll cost you more, at least your residency in Portugal is now secured, regardless of whether the golden visa goes or the D7 visa goes or another visa goes. You have your residency in Portugal. Do you want to move to Portugal right now? So, over the past few years, all visas have faced a backlog, but the golden visa especially has faced huge backlogs, sometimes going back a year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe even more. In comparison, if you had your documents together on pretty much any other visa, for example, the D7 or the digital nomad visa, you could potentially move to Portugal within 3 to 6 months. At the very least, you would probably be settled and in Portugal and at least waiting for your IMA appointment, if not had it, within 6 to 12 months of having submitted your application. Maybe a little bit longer, but more or less there, but much, much faster than the golden visa. Now, IMA, the Portuguese immigration authorities, is always promising that they'll sort out the backlog, and there are always changes being made and promised. But the reality is, if you want to move to Portugal full time and you're ready to move more or less right now, the D7 is probably the better option, or the digital nomad visa, or the D2, the D1, the D3, any of them basically, aside from the golden visa. The golden visa isn't cheap. First of all, you need to invest 500,000 euros or donate 250,000 euros. Now, in theory, if you invest 500,000 euros, you would hope to get that back and hopefully with a return. There are even funds that offer fixed returns that more or less keep up with inflation rather than performance-based funds. However, in the case of performance-based funds, it is an investment and investments can go up and down. But in theory, you hope to get your 500,000 euros back and hopefully a little bit more as well. But what about fees? Now, this is where it gets more expensive because the fees for the golden visa are much higher than the fees for the D7 visa. Between the application fee and the initial processing fee for the golden visa, you might spend around 6,600 euros on fees. And then you might spend another 3,000 euros on renewal fees each time you are required to renew. This is before legal fees or having a lawyer handle your application, which might cost you another 5,000 to 15,000 euros depending on the firm. If you have dependents, for example, a spouse or a long-term partner, you will have to factor these costs in as well. It doesn't necessarily double or triple the costs because there's usually a discount for dependents, but it is going to be significant. There are also other costs to consider. For example, if you're investing in a fund, which is the most common route in 2025 and onwards, you will need to factor in the fees associated with that. For example, there may be performance management fees, subscription fees, withdrawal fees, etc. Now, for a visa like the D7 visa or digital nomad visa or any of the other visas, the fees, at least the government fees, are much, much lower. Instead of spending around 10,000 euros in government fees and let's say another 10,000 in legal fees with the golden visa, your government fees might be around 400, 500 euros or so, and then more or less the same for renewals. Now, if you use a lawyer to handle your D7 application, you may spend around 2,000 to 4,000 euros for the application for the first person, the main applicant, and obviously some costs for any family members as well. But needless to say, the D7 costs in terms of government fees and even legal fees are a lot lower than the golden visa. Now, there are other things to factor in, for example, taxes. If you move to Portugal on the D7 visa, you will be a tax resident here. If you are a high earner in another country where taxes are lower, you may end up spending more in taxes in Portugal over the 5 years than you would in golden visa fees if you stayed where you are. So there are other costs to factor in. But generally speaking, the D7 visa is the cheaper option. Now next, can you handle Portuguese bureaucracy? Portuguese bureaucracy is a challenge. It is a mess. And whether you go for the golden visa or the D7 visa, you're going to feel the impact of this.
With the D7, one thing I want to tell people when starting this process is you need to be calm. This is going to bring you anxiety through the process. And even if you have a lawyer, you're going to become crazy that the lawyer is not working. The lawyer is working. We are trying to get you an appointment. The faster you get your visa, the faster we get an approval, and it's better for us. So you do need to know that you need to be calm. This process is hard, it's long, it's draining. So you need to prepare both emotionally, financially. You need to be prepared for this.
And there are plenty of other things that are messy in Portugal right now. For example, the cost of buying a property, dealing with the tax office, even changing your driving license. However, with the golden visa, you can avoid a lot of this because even though you're a resident and even though you go through the visa process, you aren't uprooting your life here. You can potentially avoid tax residency. You can potentially avoid dealing with a lot of government departments besides just IMA. Basically, you can have one foot in Portugal and one foot out, whereas with the D7 visa or any other visa, you need to put both feet in. Now, which visa is right for you? That really depends, okay? So there isn't an answer that's right for everybody. And if you would like to talk through this with somebody, visit portugalist.com/chat. But in short, I would say if you want to move to Portugal full time and you're more or less ready to do this, the D7 usually makes more sense. It's faster to process, the fees are lower, and you won't tie up 500,000 euros in investments. You can invest that elsewhere in something else, but it won't have to be in a very limited number of Portuguese investments. Now, if you're not ready to move yet, or you don't know if you will ever want to move to Portugal, and really what you're looking for is just like a backup plan, either for yourself or for your family members, the Golden Visa is probably the better option. If you like this video, please head over to portugalist.com for more helpful content like this. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye for now.